Here's a promise, and you know this. In your leadership, you're going to face problems and challenges and obstacles, and you're always going to have different options. And some of the options are going to be easier than the others. And in most cases, not all, but in most cases, you're going to have the easy option, which is usually wrong, and you're going to have the difficult option, which is usually right. Again, it's not all cases, but in most of them, we could call it the easy wrong and the hard right. I want to encourage you to create the habit of choosing the hard right. For example, you may have a toxic team member that's disrupting the culture and prohibiting forward movement from happening. The easy thing to do, what a lot of us do, is like we just kind of hope things get better, or we kind of like hint around to this person or whatever. The hard thing to do is to have a very serious developmental conversation where you say, this kind of behavior is inappropriate. It needs to become this by this certain time, and if not, then we're gonna make a change. That's not easy to do, but you're gonna choose the hard right. If your organization is struggling right now, it's easy to make little tweaks, to do what's easy, to change what's manageable. It's hard to make some really difficult decisions. The great leaders choose the hard right. Many leaders tend to ask, what's easy? We don't do that. Many leaders ask what's easy. The best leaders ask what's right. And we get in the habit of choosing the hard right. Now, if you're a seasoned leader, you know that this principle for your organization is difficult to do, and that's why so many leaders struggle to do the hard right. The reason it's hard to do the hard right is because it often makes a difficult situation even more difficult in the short run, and that's why it's hard. But as a leader, you're called to solve the most difficult problems, and sometimes making the hard right decisions is painful. And that's why I always tell leaders, if you aren't hurting, you aren't leading. You have to make the very difficult choices that other people are unwilling to make. I tell our team often that the difference between where you are and where you could be might be the painful decision that you're avoiding. I want you to stop and think about that right now. The difference between the impact that you're having and the impact that you could have, the difference between where your team is and where it could be, may be the painful decision that you're avoiding. Hey, we want to be a great leader. And we know that great leaders, they choose the hard right. Doing the hard right may be more difficult in the short run, but you aren't playing for what makes tomorrow easier. You're playing for what makes your team better. I want to encourage you to apply the habit of the hard right to every area of your life, not just your leadership. If you did something wrong, it's easier to let it roll. It's harder to apologize, but if it's right to apologize, apologize. It's easier to hide a secret sin than it is to confess your secret sin. Confess it and find freedom. If someone hurts you, it's easier to be mad, to be ticked off, and it's harder and right to forgive. We're going to choose the hard right. From a spiritual standpoint, for those of you who might share my spiritual beliefs, I always tell people this: do what's right and trust God with the results. Do what's right and trust God with the results, because we'll never regret doing what's right. The best leaders have the habit of you first leadership. I'll illustrate it. You and a buddy are walking into a restaurant, and you're talking side by side, and you get to the door. What do? Well, either you boldly walk out and you go first, or you intentionally slow down. You might put your head down a little bit, put your hand out, and you honor your friend and you say, you go first. I want to encourage you to take this mindset into your leadership and incorporate the you first habit into your leadership. Now, I want to tell you, you can have this intention in your heart, but it's harder to do than you can imagine, especially over time and especially as you rise in influence, because we have to call it what it is. The natural trajectory of leadership, unfortunately, is towards self. The natural trajectory. If you're in a meeting and you're the leader, you tend to talk first and you generally talk last. If there's a decision to be made, your team often looks to you. If things are going well, people praise you, great job. If things are not going well, they criticize you. And we have to understand, because the trajectory of leadership is towards self, we have to intentionally fight against it to really be a you-centered leader. So instead of being me-centered, we want to be you-centered in our leadership. And some are going to push back and say, but isn't it my job to get results? I like what Simon Sinek said. Simon Sinek said, the leaders who get the most out of their people are those who care most about their people. It really, really, really matters for us in our hearts to care about people. Now, how does this play out? And I want to tell you this clearly, is it has to start in your heart before they feel it in the office. In other words, you have to genuinely care. You don't have to like everyone to care about them. You don't have to like someone to care about them. For example, you have family members that drive you crazy, right? But you still love them. And in your work, in your leadership, you don't have to prefer everyone to work well with them. In fact, the more people you lead, the more people will be outside of your preferences. And there are team members I don't prefer, and I guarantee you they don't prefer me, but I love them and I respect them, and they may love me and respect me. Now, the problem is, if you're like me, you're gonna be more naturally self-centered. And to become a leader, the trajectory often is that we believe we're good enough to be a leader, and so the trajectory moves really, really quickly towards self-centeredness. So let me give you a suggestion to implement the habit of you first leadership. Very, very simply, do this. Start every interaction with the other person in mind. Anytime you interact with someone. And this is not easy to do because we tend to start every interaction with either ourselves in mind or with our leadership agenda in mind. You can see it all the way down into written communication. Let's say you're going to send an email and you even want to appreciate someone. In your email, most people start with I-centered communication. They'll say, I want to tell you thank you. And that's starting with an I. What you want to do is start with a you. You want to start the email and say, you are an amazing leader. I want to tell you thank you. Start with you. Every time you can, start with them in mind. And one way to do this is to lead with questions. It can be an informal question like, how was your weekend? How'd your kids do in the game? Or if you're in a one-on-one, you can be more specific and you can ask things like, what's something in your life outside the office that you're excited about? And I want you to know you're capable, you're gifted, you're called, and I really believe it's my calling to help you become the best leader that you can be. And so if we ever meet sometime and you say like, well, it kind of feels like I know you, even though I don't know you, like I feel the same way. I feel the connection immediately because I was thinking about you when I wrote this, even though we may have never met. Like I visualize a young leader like I was with more passion than wisdom. And I want to speak directly to that person that you are because I was there. Or I visualize someone who's new in their role, feeling insecure and incapable. And I speak directly to that because I was there. I felt the same way. I visualize a company owner who feels the weight that his or her team will never, ever understand because I feel that same weight. And so when I write a leadership teaching, what I want you to know is like, I am thinking about you. And when you do the same for your team, they'll feel it. You don't have to say it. They'll feel it. And the bottom line is like, they'll work for a paycheck, but they'll give their heart. They'll give their best for someone who cares about them. So if you want to be great, create the habit of you first leadership. Give as much away, praise as much as you can, care about as many different aspects of their life that is appropriate. Tell them how much they matter, empower them to make decisions. And I always say this, that some leaders try to make you think that they are important, but the best leaders help you see why you are important. Now, we've covered a lot of content, and the good news is you don't have to adopt all these habits, but I want to encourage you to pursue most of them. Make them yours, own them in a way that is consistent with how you're wired in your leadership. What do we know about great leaders? Most great leaders don't let the day happen to them, they happen to their day. They get the no snooze habit. When you wake up with a plan, you wake up with passion. Whenever you wake up strong and you bring your best and you win the day.